Good morning, everyone. And good evening too for those in Singapore. I'm Annalise, for those who weren't here yesterday, from Felsberg, and I'll be your host today for the second day of our event. Brazil and Singapore are closer understanding, but I'm quite tending to rebaptize, to rename our event by quoting Ambassador Battlemas yesterday. She said, Brazil and Singapore is a matchmaking heaven. So that's the new name of our event. Today we have a very exciting program ahead. We have IP, AI, the new double taxation treaty, which was finally adopted. And before we start with Mr. Felsberg, founding partner of Brazilian law firm Felsberg Advogados, and Mr. Stanley Lai, the head of intellectual property practice and co-head of cybersecurity and data protection practice at our partner firm Alan Gladhill from Singapore, for both some welcoming words. I just have a special request to all the speakers and panelists just to respect their speaking time. Please, Thomas, the floor is yours.
Good evening, Singapore. Good morning, São Paulo. It's a pleasure to be here for our second day seminar. We have a very exciting program. I would like to thank our sponsors, Ellen and Gladhill, Bradell Brothers, Invest São Paulo Negócios, Brazilian Embassy in Singapore, Enterprise Singapore, Abdib, and Singapore International Arbitration Center. It's really fantastic. We had a wonderful event yesterday. I'm sure this one will be, if not better, at least as good as it was yesterday, So it's a great pleasure to be introducing you all. And I would like to ask Dr. Stanley Lai, the head of intellectual property practice at Allen and Gladhill, for his introduction. Thank you. Thank you so very much.
We are very happy. First of all, I hope you can hear me. As introduced, I'm Stanley. I head the intellectual property practice of Allen and Gladhill, and I also co-head the cybersecurity and data protection practice of the firm. And on behalf of Allen and Gladhill, I wish to extend a very warm welcome to colleagues in Brazil, colleagues in Felsberg, and also in-person attendees, including officials from the Embassy of Brazil, also colleagues from our firm. Just a brief introduction of Allen and Gladhill. It's one of the largest and leading full-service law firms in Southeast Asia, based in Singapore with regional offices in Myanmar and Vietnam, and we also have associate and network firms in Malaysia, Indonesia. Over 650 lawyers comprise our network in Southeast Asia. We're very delighted to host today's event in conjunction with our colleagues from Felsberg Advogados, Invest SP, and the Embassy of Brazil in Singapore. Brazil and Singapore have always been close trading partners. With the conclusion of the Mercosur-Singapore Free Trade Agreement in 2022, we can only expect the volume of trade and investment to increase over the coming years. Heaven is a place on earth, and we like to think that it exists between Brazil and Singapore. In fact, dialogues like today's session are invaluable. They present precious opportunities for businesses in Brazil and Singapore to gain better understanding of each other's operating environment, legal systems, and the exciting investment that each jurisdiction presents. In particular, our speakers today will be sharing more about the intellectual property rights protection regimes and the governance of artificial intelligence in our respective jurisdictions, and the opportunities that will arise from the Brazil-Singapore Double Tax Treaty. I hope that today's dialogue will serve as a meaningful stepping stone to a deeper engagement between companies in Brazil and Singapore. I wish you a very fruitful session ahead. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Thomas, very much for these welcoming words. And I would like to invite Julia Amaral she's head of science, technology, and innovation, the innovation section at the Brazilian Embassy of Brazil in Singapore. Um, so Julia will tell us a bit about all the opportunities between Brazil and Singapore in this technology and innovation area.
Well, following yesterday's event that was more focused on infrastructure and the presentation of Ambassador Barthelmes that focused on Brazil-Singapore relation as a whole, I'd like to thank Felsberg Advogados and also Ellen and Gladhill for this great opportunity to discuss recent governmental initiatives that are geared towards building connections between the innovation and startup ecosystems of Brazil and Singapore. And the first initiative I would like to talk about is the official report mapping the Singaporean innovation ecosystem. This is a public report that was written by the Embassy of Brazil in Singapore, and it identifies the main players and opportunities in Singapore's innovation ecosystem, with the purpose of providing reliable information to Brazilian startups and innovation actors that are planning to explore Singapore's innovation market. As I said, this is a public report. I can share with you the link for this document, which I think it will be very useful for companies that are planning to expand to Singapore. And secondly, the embassy ran its first startup mission in 2022 in a partnership with SEBRAE, which is a Brazilian institution that fosters small companies. And we selected 3 Brazilian startups to participate in last year's edition of the Singapore Week of Innovation and Technology, SWITCH, which is the largest tech event in Southeast Asia. And what I would like to share with you is that we were thrilled by the level of interest raised by this initiative. We were surprised that 70 Brazilian startups applied, showing that Singapore and Southeast Asia are already on their radar. And thirdly, well, Brazil participated in Switch as a global partner for the first time last year in 2022. The embassy built an 18 square meter booth showcasing the Brazilian ecosystem, and the 3 Brazilian startups that I mentioned before that were selected in our selection process for the startup mission. And we also flew the president of the Brazilian Association of Startups, AB Startups, to Singapore to participate in this event, where he delivered the presentation together with Ambassador Barthelmes on the opportunities offered by the Brazilian innovation ecosystem. And this year, in 2023, we are very glad that Brazil will be at Switch again. And this time, our booth will be twice the size of last year's booth, and we'll showcase again the Brazilian innovation ecosystem. And this year, we'll showcase also 15 Brazilian startups that will come to Singapore to take part in this event. These 15 Brazilian startups will be selected by the Startup Outreach Program, which is developed by Apex Brazil together with other ministries and agencies from Brazil, and is the largest governmental program that supports the internationalization of Brazilian startups. Unfortunately, registrations are already closed, but anyone can participate at Switch and visit the Brazilian Pavilion. And what is interesting to mention as well is that this program, Startup Outreach, it already had 13 internationalization cycles in 9 countries, and Singapore is the 2nd country in Asia. So it also shows that there is a growing interest in this region, also for small companies in Brazil, also for technology companies and startups. And finally, last but not least, we have the Scale Up in Brazil, which is a landing pad for innovative tech companies developed by the Brazilian Trade and Investment Promotion Agency, Apex Brazil, and also ABVCAP, which is the Brazilian Association of Venture Capital and Private Equity. And of course, this initiative is in partnership with Enterprise Singapore. And the scale up in Brazil, it provides international companies only from Israel, Japan, and Singapore so far, with the tools to validate their products, secure customers, and start operating in Brazil. In its third edition, that was in 2022, 4 Singaporean companies participated in the program, and I had the opportunity to talk with representatives of 2 of these startups, and they really enjoyed the program, and they presented very good results, and are possibly planning to start operating in Brazil in the near future. And also this time I have some good news for Scale Up in Brazil, because registrations for the 4th edition, which will take place this year, are open until the end of next month. So I'd like to invite Singaporean companies to apply for the selection process. I can share the link in the chat afterwards as well. Concerning sectors that present opportunities for Brazilian startups that are interested in investing and developing businesses in Singapore, like Ambassador said last night in her presentation, we have a significant number of Brazilian companies here in Singapore in areas that as diverse as mining, petrochemicals, oil, aircraft. But there are also some innovative sectors that could present good opportunities for Brazilian startups. As we know, the Singaporean government takes a long-term and very straightforward approach regarding investments in innovation. And when we look at official reports on this subject, it is possible to find priority areas that may offer opportunities for innovative Brazilian companies. I will list some of them, but all of these areas are well described in the report mapping the Singaporean innovation ecosystem that I mentioned before. The first one is agri-tech and food tech. Food security is a key issue here in Singapore. The country imports nearly 90% of all the food they consume here. So there is an urgency to overcome global resource constraints and mitigate the effects of climate change, as well as meet demands of a growing population and changes in consumer preferences. So there is a growing interest in sectors like alternative protein-based foods or plant-based foods, and also in urban farming or indoor vertical farming, as the country's limited land area prevents the dedication of vast areas to cultivation, opposite to Brazil, right? But there are Brazilian companies that actually are very innovative in these sectors in urban farming and plant-based food. So this is a sector that presents good opportunities for Brazilian startups. Also, clean energy is another interesting sector. Singapore constantly explores alternative sources of energy, as well as new ways to reduce energy consumption and the dependency on fossil fuels. A third sector will be health tech. One of the biggest challenges of the country in the future will be the gradual aging of population. So there are a lot of investments in health tech with the objective of developing innovative health services, medicines, and devices that provide better outcomes and could enable a sustainable healthcare system. Other sectors that I could mention here would be smart cities and digital industry and intercommunication sector, and also the electronic industry that already plays a key role here in Singapore and represents an important part of the Singaporean economy. And Industry 4.0, there are more information on that in the report, like I said, that I will share with you in the end. And if we think about the ways that Brazilian government may help Brazilian companies to explore opportunities and develop businesses in Singapore, I would say that the embassy, its trade section, and also the science, technology, and innovation section are available to answer questions and help companies liaise with relevant partners in Singapore. We can share our contacts in the chat as well. And feel free to contact us. It would be a pleasure to help these Brazilian companies that are interested in exploring all the opportunities that we can find here in Singapore. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Julia, very much. I think you were the embassy together with Enterprise Singapore. You were absolutely go-to partners for companies who wish to do business, Brazilian who wish to do business in Singapore and the other way around. Absolutely. Thank you very much. And now I would like to invite Jayi and Diego to jointly present from both a Brazilian and Singapore perspective. We spoke a lot about tech, but we need to keep those IP rights secured. So please, the floor is yours. How do we secure these rights?
Thank you very much for the kind introduction. A very good morning to our colleagues in Brazil and to our colleagues in Singapore. A very good evening. For this segment on keeping IP rights secure, I'll be taking you through the IP protection and enforcement regime in Singapore before handing the time over to Diego, who will give you the Brazil perspective. For my part of the presentation, I'm going to begin by giving you a very brief introduction to the laws in Singapore for the protection of key IP rights, namely trademarks, registered designs, patents, and copyright. Of course, Singapore's IP protection regime is only as good as its IP enforcement regime. So I would like to take this opportunity to also share with you a significant development in Singapore's IP dispute resolution system. And that is the introduction of an optional fast track for IP dispute resolution, known as the simplified process for certain IP claims. So let's dive straight into the content. I'm going to begin first with trademarks. In Singapore, a trademark means any sign that is capable of being represented graphically and which is capable of distinguishing goods or services provided by the owner from goods or services provided by any other person. This means that other than traditional trademarks such as word marks and shape marks, it is also potentially possible to register non-conventional trademarks such as sound marks in Singapore, because these can also be graphically represented in the form of a stave. In Singapore, a trademark application can be refused on either absolute grounds or relative grounds. Absolute grounds for refusal can include where the sign does not fulfill the definition of a trademark, where the trademark is devoid of distinctive character or is descriptive, or the trademark application was made in bad faith. Examples of relative grounds of refusal would include where the trademark is similar to an earlier trademark and sought to be registered for identical or similar classes of goods and services. Another example of a relative ground of refusal is where a trademark is identical or similar to an earlier trademark, which is well known to the public at large in Singapore, and the use of the later trademark would cause dilution or would take unfair advantage of the well-known trademark. If a trademark is successfully registered in Singapore, it will be protected for an initial period of 10 years from the date of application. This can also be renewed further for further 10-year periods for an unlimited number of times. Now, even after a trademark has been successfully registered, it can still be subject to invalidation proceedings on the ground that it was registered in breach of an absolute or a relative ground for refusal. Do note that it is not a requirement that a trademark has been used in Singapore prior to making an application for that trademark. However, a registered trademark can be subject to revocation proceedings on the basis that the trademark has not been put to genuine use in the course of trade in Singapore for 5 years, or the use has been suspended for an uninterrupted period of 5 years. On this slide, I've set out the general procedure for applying for registration of trademarks in Singapore. So if the trademark registry has no issues with the application, what usually happens is that the trademark will proceed to publication in the Trademarks Journal for a period of 2 months for opposition proceedings to be lodged by any interested parties. If no opposition is lodged, a trademark could be successfully registered in Singapore within 3 to 6 months from the time the application is made. Of course, if an opposition is lodged, the time to resolve that opposition could be much longer, so it could take an additional year perhaps to resolve that opposition and for the trademark to proceed to grant. Moving on to registered designs. In Singapore, to register a design, the design needs to be new, meaning that it has not been registered or published in Singapore or elsewhere as at the application date. A design refers to features of a shape, configuration, colors, patterns, or ornaments that gives a product its external appearance. So this can be in the 3D form, or it could be in a 2D form. A product which the design is applied to can also be physical, for example, jewelry, or it could be non-physical, for example, a virtual keyboard projected onto a surface. Once a design has been registered, it will be protected for an initial period of 5 years from the application date. This is renewable for further 5-year periods up to a maximum of 15 years in total. In this slide, once again, I've set out the procedure for applying for a registered design in Singapore. After the filing of the application for a registered design, the registry in Singapore will conduct an examination to ensure that the formal requirements of the application are met. If the application fails to meet certain requirements, the registry will inform the applicant to give the applicant an opportunity to rectify these deficiencies. The registry is not actually required to consider substantive requirements, so the registry does not need to consider whether the design is in fact new or not. However, after a registered design has been successfully registered, it is possible for an interested party to then apply for revocation of the registered design on the ground that it was not new or on any other available ground in the Registered Designs Act. The registration process for a registered design can be completed within around 3 to 4 months from the application date, although of course it might take slightly longer if there was a need to correct certain deficiencies in your application. Moving on to patents. Now, what amounts to a patentable invention under Singapore law? There are essentially 3 main criteria. The first criteria is that the invention must be new, meaning that it does not form part of the state of the art as at the priority date. And the priority date in Singapore is taken to be the date of application for the patent. The second key criteria is that the invention must involve an inventive step. In other words, it is not obvious to a person skilled in the art. And the third criteria is that the invention must also be capable of industrial application. Please note, however, that an invention does not include certain subject matter, such as discoveries, scientific theories, and mathematical methods. Patents which are granted in Singapore will be granted for 20 years from the application date, but this is subject to the payment of annual renewal fees from the 5th year onwards. A patent that has been successfully registered can also be subject to revocation proceedings. For example, on the ground that it is not a patentable invention, on the ground of insufficiency, meaning that the specification of the patent does not disclose the invention clearly and completely enough. Or it could be that the patent was obtained fraudulently or on the basis of a misrepresentation. So those are the grounds which a patent could be revoked in Singapore, although these are non-exhaustive. I've set out the general procedure for the application for patents in Singapore. What I want to highlight is that overall, the time required for patent applications in Singapore to proceed to grant would normally take about 1.5 years to 3 years from the time of application. So that's the normal turnaround time. However, in Singapore, our IP registry has launched an acceleration program. This is known as the SGIP Fast program. The point of SGIP Fast is to support the acceleration of patent applications in all technology fields. Currently, this pilot program is slated to last until 30th of April 2024. Under the SGIP Fast program, straightforward patent applications can be granted in as fast as 6 months. Non-straightforward patent applications can also be granted in as fast as 9 months. But do note that there is a cap of 10 patent applications per month, and there is also a further cap of 2 patent applications which can be made per entity per month. This cap will be reset on the first day of every calendar month. So that would be the acceleration program that was introduced in Singapore. Finally, we move on to copyright. In order for a work to receive copyright protection in Singapore, the work needs to be a protectable work, meaning a literary work, a dramatic, musical, artistic, or entrepreneurial work. So entrepreneurial works would include things like sound recordings and films. The work needs to be original, meaning that sufficient skill, labor, or judgment must have been used in creating the work. However, there is no need for the work to display any sort of literary or artistic merit. The work also needs to be expressed in a tangible form, and it needs to be connected to Singapore, meaning that the author needs to be a Singapore citizen or a Singapore resident, or the work was first published in Singapore. In Singapore, it's not necessary to register in order to obtain copyright in Singapore. Copyright automatically subsists upon the creation of the work, assuming that it is protectable and original. As for the duration of protection, this will vary according to the type of work in question. So, for example, for literary, dramatic, artistic, and musical works, the duration of protection would be the life of the author plus another 70 years. So that's what I had for IP protection. I want to move on to IP enforcement in Singapore. And there's a very recent and significant development in the IP enforcement regime in Singapore. That is the introduction of the simplified process for certain IP claims. This simplified process was only introduced in April 2022. The objective of the simplified process is to enhance access to the IP dispute resolution system, especially for individuals and SMEs in Singapore, and also to position Singapore as a choice venue for IP dispute resolution in Asia. The simplified process facilitates a quick and more cost-effective dispute resolution mechanism. And this is achieved by active case management by the Singapore High Court to ensure trial of the case is completed within a maximum of 2 days. There is also a cap on cost recovery, and the objective of the cost recovery cap is to ensure that parties do not deliberately drag the proceedings, because they know that there is no means for them to recover that legal cost at the end of the day. So parties can seek the usual court remedies, and interim relief under the simplified process. In fact, I'm currently acting in a copyright dispute, which is being heard on the simplified process, and I can personally vouch that it is significantly faster compared to the normal track. And so I would strongly recommend that IP rights holders consider how the simplified process can fit into your IP enforcement strategy, not only in Singapore, but also in the region. For example, you could use the simplified process to obtain a quick and cheap judgment that's in your favor in Singapore, and to then use this judgment to negotiate a region-wide settlement. I've come to the end of my presentation, and I'll hand over the time to Diego.
Thank you, Zia. Good evening to everyone in Singapore and Asia, and good morning to my colleagues in Brazil. Considering that we have limited time, I'll try to benefit from both the presentation from my colleague Gia from Allen and Gladhill, but also to the fact that IP legislation worldwide tends to be very much symmetric. So a lot of aspects you may find in Brazil, you are also applicable in Singapore. The most relevant difference between trademark perspective from Brazil and Singapore is the actual definition, because Brazil requires that a trademark must be visually perceptive. So while in Singapore you may register sounds, in Brazil this is, and the smells, in Brazil it's not possible to obtain such registrations. The validity term is also 10 years in Brazil for a trademark registration, but this term only starts when the trademark is registered. So, and you may also renew a trademark registration for successive periods of 10 years, as much as you wish. So this is also a similarity. Non-use cancellation actions are available in Brazil as well. So the trademark owner is obliged to use the trademark in Brazil and should not stop using the trademark for a period of 5 years or more. Prosecution time is 18 months in Brazil, which is still a long time, a long period in comparison to many jurisdictions. But I believe we are heading to the right way, because a couple of years ago, a trademark prosecution case could easily take around 4 years. So the Brazilian PTO is making a huge investment in hiring new examiners and training new examiners. So you may obtain a trademark registration in Brazil roughly in waiting months from filing. So we know that improvements have been made, but it's still a long journey. And our recommendation to anyone who wants to register a trademark in Brazil is to pay special attention to searching, clearing the mark before start prosecution, before filing the trademark application, so we can locate potential obstacles and try to avoid them by setting a specific strategy for the region, and so avoiding this time-consuming prosecution, which tends to be more costly. 3D trademarks are also available for registration in Brazil, which is very interesting. We also have registration on certain non-traditional trademarks. Positional trademarks is also a possibility, and I believe the biggest and the most relevant example are the Adidas stripes. So you may register the position of these stripes in a certain clothing article. So it is interesting. The problem in relation to 3D registration in Brazil is because the PTO is very much concerned about distinctiveness. So you really need to have a new design which is not connected or directly connected to the actual product or packaging. Otherwise, your registration will probably be rejected based on lack of distinctiveness or to be the common shape of the product. And this is very common in the footwear industry. We have seen lots of footwear companies trying to register 3D trademarks in Brazil, and all registrations have been rejected. In fact, the only footwear shape that has been registered in Brazil was the one from Carolina Herrera, but it was not for a footwear, it was for the perfume bottle. So in this case, it was not considered a common shape of the product, and the PTO granted the registration. Moving to industrial designs, so if you have an industrial design, a design of a product that you may like to protect in Brazil, if it's new, the best option would be to go through industrial design registration. The system is once again very similar. Brazil defines industrial designs as the ornamental plastic form of an article or the ornamental combination of lines and colors. So the plastic form of an article could be, for example, a footwear, and it must be 3D form. And the ornamental combination of lines and colors are the 2D form. And an example would be a certain pattern applied on fabric. So the Burberry pattern would be a very good example of 2D industrial design registration available in Brazil. A difference we could highlight as well is the validity term, because we have 10 additional years when compared to Singapore. When you register design in Brazil, you obtain a 10-year term from filing, and this could be renewed for 3 additional 5-year terms, so totaling 25 years. The registration, as well as in Singapore, is granted based on mere formalities. So if the application meets mere formalities, you obtain a registration, and but substantive examination may be obtained once the registration is granted. So, for example, if you want to enforce a design right, if you want to file a court action, if you want to send strongly worded cease and desist letters, especially if you want to go to court and obtain a preliminary injunction, you must request substantive examination. And the PTO will really go through not only the formalities, but on the grounds if the design is new, if it was original, and this would be very much important for your enforcement strategy. So let's move on. Just another issue in relation to industrial designs, you may find certain peculiarities when we are claiming priorities from different countries. It's very common in the US that you protect a portion of a product. So once again, using the footwear example, you protect the inner sole of the footwear. You protect the outer sole of the footwear. And in these jurisdictions, you may submit the design with dashed lines. So while you are just seeking protection for the inner sole, you present the complete footwear with dashed lines just to show the position or to give a perspective without asking for exclusive rights over the dashed lines. Brazil does not deal well with dashed lines, so every now and then we have to either cover to make these dashed lines solid, so we have to complete these dashed lines, or we should remove them. The key issue is that the remaining object must be solid. So if you remove and you have open lines, for example, if the examiner could not really observe and understand what is being protected, probably you would have to complete the dashed lines. As regards to patents, I believe we have a biggest difference here, because we also have patent inventions. And the requirements for a secure patent in Brazil would be the same. So novelty, inventive step, industrial application. The validity term is similar, so 20 years from filing. But we also have utility models. So we like to say that it's not so inventive invention, because it embodies a new shape of an existing product or an arrangement, and it must involve inventive step as well. And this new shape arrangement must provide an improvement both on either on function or on the manufacture process. So this is a different type of patent. We've reduced the scope, so the validity is a little shorter, so 15 years from the filing date. Prosecution of patents in Brazil is also still a problem. Once again, the PTO is making big investments, but this is still an issue. So prosecution may take 5 to 10 years, depending on the field of activity. Our IP law used to have a minimum validity term from grant, because both terms, 20 years and 15 years, are from filing. So if you spend 5 to 10 prosecuting, when the patent is granted, when the utility model is granted, you would have just a small period of time. So we used to have a minimum of 10 years for patents and 7 years for utility models. But very recent, the Supreme Court declared this provision to be unconstitutional. So we no longer have this minimum term, and all the IP lawyers and the IP associations are pushing the PTO to make analysis even faster. So finally, we also reach copyright. Copyright are very much the same in relation to the Singapore system. The terms are the same, and they may vary depend on the type of work. A peculiarity and a very interesting peculiarity from the Brazilian system is that moral rights cannot be alienable or renounced. So this may be tricky, probably when you are drafting contracts, when you're hiring some work for hire, when you are looking into your employment contracts, it will be very important for you to pay special attention to these moral right issues in Brazil, so you do not have any problems on the way. So I believe we are getting out of time, so please feel free to reach me if you have any doubts or queries. And I would like to thank you for your attention today, especially my colleague Gia from Allen and Gladhill. Have a good day from you in Brazil, and have a good evening for our colleagues in Singapore and Asia. Thank you.
Information about securing IP rights in both countries. And now I'd like to invite my partner, Clarissa Luz. She's our partner for technology and data protection, and she will tell us about the global governance of artificial intelligence.
Hello, everyone. Hello, our colleagues from Asia and Singapore. And thank you for your attention. I will try to be within the 10 minutes slot. So hopefully you will enjoy this presentation. I will talk a little bit about AI problems and AI solutions. As you know, we are in the middle of the ChatGPT trending topic. And the ChatGPT is currently what AI brings mostly as a problem and a solution. So we can see that by the ChatGPT application. In 1950, what I think is curious was that Alan Turing, you probably know Alan Turing, mathematician, scientist, he said that he posed the question, can machines think? And now we are in the middle of this ChatGPT trending that leads us to this actual question. Probably it does not think, but it can help us a lot. So, but AI is rapidly transforming societies and economies and developing digital technologies, and the surge in data being produced by both humans and machines. And this is transforming society in positive ways, as you can see with some of ChatGPT solutions, but also with other solutions, just like detecting cancer more accurately than human radiologists, to providing, for example, customized teaching for children with learning disabilities. So AI can really help society. And it really promises that, right? The thing is, there's a lot of problem also. So we have seen, like in these newspapers headings, that Amazon, for instance, had ditched AI recruiting tool that favored men for technical jobs. So it was a biased AI, a biased algorithm AI. And we can see in these headings that there are a lot of other cases of biased AI. And this is something that is very important for us to look into when we help a client that has an AI based technology model. So Apple Card's credit assessment algorithm, for instance, was reported by Goldman Sachs customers to have shown gender bias, in which men receive significantly higher credit limits than women. And this happened with a couple. The man of the couple received credit, and his wife did not receive, and she had a better score credit in the market. So the algorithm was really biased, as they say. Of course, we do not know that for sure. But you can see that the problems can lead us to a difficult situation in society. And another example that I bring to you, which was curious also and very sad, was the use of algorithms of AI in the US for providing bails. And in this case, the use of AI for analyzing the probability of people that were in jail for reinciting the crimes they had already committed, the algorithm brought a conclusion. It concluded that it was a racial algorithm because it resulted in people that were Black were being given higher risk assessings, and the people who were white, although they had committed crimes like gun robbery and stuff like that, they were being lower rated by and risk. So it was very it was a violence against people. So by that you can see that there are many other examples, but I wanted to bring these, which are clarify the problem with AI. So what did the countries do? Well, the countries, not much by the time, but the companies and the VCs have been investing a lot in AI. As you can see in this market size worldwide, you can see by the 2021, 2022, as we begin there with the charter, it begins with around it's in $1 billion, okay? So it begins with around $500 billion, and by 2030 we expect it to get to nearly $2 trillion. This is the AI market revenue, and this is my source is Next Move Strategy Consulting. So we expect it to be very big in market cap, in market size, okay? And the regions that are most prominent are, of course, South America, Asia, and Europe, and North America, right? By this, you can see that there are a lot of investments in many different industries, sectors. As you can see from the CB Insights appointment, the CB Insights last analyzed that the 100 most prominent startups that use AI are basically they are basically divided in supply chains, financial and insurance, marketing, product making, research, energy. So many different and various industry sectors are currently investing, and they are really prominent. According to what I think is a very good website to look into, that is CB Insights. So what has the OECD done while the countries have not reached into regulations, national regulations yet. In 2019, the OECD tried to help by bringing up AI principles and recommendations for governments, right? And these principles are until today, they are currently still used as the most important principles for assessing risks, for defining regulations worldwide. The OECD country members, right? They did sign into these principles, and also Brazil, which is not yet a member, but also did become part of the OECD principles as an adherent country. Okay, so Brazil is now just 2 weeks ago. Brazil has its own AI regulation bill, which is not yet a law, but it has passed into this as an AI strategy. So which countries have AI strategies? Okay, sorry, I passed too much. Okay, AI strategies are what we call as AI regulations, right? So it's not only a regulation, it starts with public consultings, and it becomes a regulation after some frameworks, et cetera, and many countries do have AI strategies. Some of them have not developed into regulations yet. Brazil is just now becoming one of those countries. And Singapore,
EU
yes.
regulation?
Sorry?
Is there an EU regulation?
Not yet a regulation defined, but it's becoming an AI strategy they have, but not a specific regulation yet.
Okay.
But they have a strategy already developed.
Okay.
And Singapore is, of course, Singapore is always with technology-wise, innovation-wise, Singapore is highly in front of many other countries, and they have already this. I've talked before with our colleague from Singapore, which has just participated in the previous panel, and well, they have not only an AI framework, a toolkit developed by the government authorities, and together with the data protection authority. So it's very important. Their work is very important regarding the governance of AI there. So I'm not gonna talk too much about regulations by itself, because I think we are looking into opportunities here. I think this is the reason for our debate here, for our participation here, for bringing together our colleagues. And I think that it is more interesting also to talk about opportunities. And Brazil, this is something that I found very curious, and I found this in OECD's website. Brazil and Singapore are together, very tightly together, in the digital security AI industry. They are in the top tier of the countries that have the most investments by VCs in this sector, in this industry sector. And not only in this one, but there are others like logistic, wholesale, and retail. So by that, you can see that Brazil and Singapore, as we have seen before in this event, they are different countries, differently arranged, and Brazil is much bigger. But of course, there are many things to be complemented and to be collaborated into and helped with each other. So you can see by this graph that Singapore has, as the most prominent industries in AI, are quite similar to Brazil. They are media, social platforms, marketing, financial, and insurance services, while Brazil has the same in its top and most prominent industries to look into and to invest in. So we can see that there are a lot of investments from this season in the same or at least similar industry sectors within both countries. And so I think that the most practical and the most important thing to consider from a legal standpoint is to look into AI governance and algorithm impact assessment. These are two things that we do here in our practice area. When our clients have used AI as their tool or as their base model for the services, we do algorithm impact assessments, which has its own methodology, and we deliver that to our clients based on OECD principles, based on good practices, and together sometimes with technicians, right? Because a lawyer cannot know for sure if an algorithm, for instance, is biased or not. It has to have other people from other sectors to analyze that. And to conclude here, to end my presentation, I would like to state that there's not only AI governance, there is no AI governance without data governance. There's no AI governance without internet governance, without IoT governance, cybersecurity governance, digital platform governance. So what is AI governance? It is digital governance. There is no data governance without digital governance. This is a chart by Fernando Filgueiras and Virgilio Almeida in their book, and I really like this a lot because it shows that the actors for any of these sectors are the same. They are the states, the firms, the civil society, international organizations, and the principles are mainly the same: fairness, inclusion, human rights. So we have to have a holistic approach to any assessment, and this is our role as digital law attorneys. All right. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
I hope you have a question.
Thank you, Clarissa, very, very much. A lot of information, very rich. And I'll pass the mic to Gabriel, and may I ask you to switch places so that the camera can better.
Well, good evening, Singapore. Good morning, Brazil. It's a pleasure to be here to briefly talk about the so much celebrated double tax treaty between Brazil and Singapore. I mean, most, if not all of the speakers on our event have commented the importance of having a double tax treaty in force when it comes to cross-border businesses between any nation. And of course, this is something that I'd like just to clarify before going to the specifics. Why is a double tax treaty, a DTT, so important when it comes to international businesses? DTTs, they are bilateral instruments that supersede domestic laws when it comes to taxation of income. So whenever a DTT is in force, both countries, they undertake to limit their taxing rights in cross-border transactions and investments. So it comes with no surprise that the execution of a DTT leads on average to a 30% increase in mutual investment flows. So it is very, very important, and it's actually something to celebrate about. There are certain mechanisms for avoiding double taxation, of course. There are several modalities: tax bearing, credits, exemption, and all of them are comprised in most of the DTTs executed by Brazil. But in case of the Singapore-Brazil DTT, all of them are limited to the credit mechanism, which is based on an assumption that the amount of tax paid in the source country may be or must be credited in the residence country. The Brazilian-Singapore DTT has just came into force this January 1st of this year, after several formalities that must be taken by both countries. I mean, the DTT itself was executed in May 2018, but it just became effective this year. From a Brazilian perspective, it comprises not only income tax, but actually also our social contribution of profits, which is an interesting particular. It's something very interesting from this treaty because not every treaty from Brazil comprises the social contribution on profits, which is in practical terms an additional tax, a surtax over profits. And from the Singaporean side, it comprises income tax. I have selected some, not all, but some of the main treaty dispositions which limit the taxing right of Brazil as from a source taxation perspective, and try to compare with our ordinary general rate of withholding tax at source. It may appear a little difficult to read right now, but everyone who is attending to this event will receive extended version of this presentation with much more detail on our analysis of the DTT. So due to the short time to discuss it. So I have prepared an infographic, which you may have more information and you can read it in detail. But of course, the DTT is not limited to those provisions set out in the schedule, but from an infrastructure and a tech business perspective, I have selected some of them, which are quite interesting. Business profits, dividends, interest, royalties, technical services, and capital gains. I will go through some of them now, but of course, we can further discuss all of them later on. When it comes to tech companies and startups and also venture capital investments, I think the technical services clause and also the royalties clause are those more interesting. When it comes to technical services, there is one reduction provided for in the DTT, meaning that whenever a payment is made from Singapore to Brazil or from Brazil to Singapore, the withholding tax must be limited to a 10% rate. If you think from a Brazilian perspective, this already represents an interesting economy because usually without a DTT, you would be subject to a 15% income tax rate. So from this provision, you already have a 5% economy on those. Also, this DTT is quite interesting because it provides a specific concept of technical services. This is quite new. It follows the UN Model Convention. And most of the Brazilian DTTs do not present this sort of article. So the discussion whether technical services should fall under the royalties clause or the business profits clause is something that Brazilian taxpayers have been facing from several years. And now this is an important part of the Singapore-Brazil DTT because it avoids this sort of discussion, not only because it presents a specific provision for technical services, but also it presents a specific concept of technical services, meaning we should look at the concept provided by the DTT and not the concept provided by the domestic law. As I said, it supersedes domestic law. So this is the concept to be kept in mind. Also, something interesting is the royalties part, because as I said, most of the DTTs executed by Brazil, they include technical services within the concept of royalties, which is not the case here. So you also will avoid this sort of discussion with the Brazilian RS. And the royalties article also presents an interesting a reduction of the tax burden as it reduces also to 10% the withholding income tax in all royalties payments, except for trademark royalties. Only two other Brazilian DTTs have similar provisions, which are the Brazil, Switzerland, and Brazil United Arab Emirates DTTs, meaning that so this is something very interesting from a Brazilian side as well as a Singaporean one. When it comes to funding of businesses, I think the DTT provision, which is more interesting here, is the interest article, Article 11 of the DTT. It provides for a reduction to 10% on the withholding income tax levied on interest payment, provided that it is granted by a bank for financing and purchase of equipment or investment projects. So this is something very interesting for the infrastructure sector, especially when it comes to state banks financing transactions in the other country. It reduces the overall tax rate, which would, from a Brazilian perspective at least, would be higher. It would be 15% as opposed to the 10% in such cases. Also, the DTT includes the concept of interest on equity, which is an instrument provided by certain tax laws. In Brazil, we have this concept. It's the so-called GCP. And it clarifies that the GCP is included within the concept of interest. GCP are hybrid instruments for financing. There's a very traditional discussion in Brazil whether it should be seen as equity or as debt. And then the DTT clarifies that it should indeed be considered as interest for purpose of the DTT, and then also bringing more predictability to the treatment of those payments. Also, from an investment perspective, this is something that I would like to highlight. Actually, this is the most interesting part of the DTT. Whenever Brazilian companies pay out dividends to its shareholders, whenever they are tax exempt dividends. So this is the general rule. This is what has been enforced for the last almost 20, 30 years. But now there are several discussions on the tax reform bills aiming to tax dividends at a flat rate of 15%. So this is where the DTT provision begins to become interesting. The DTT limits the taxation of the dividends to 10% if the beneficial owner holds at least 25% of the company distributing the dividends. In other cases, it limits to 15%, which is the same rate of the tax reform. But besides that, the Brazil-Singapore DTT provides for an indirect credit over dividends payout from one country to the other, meaning that regardless of the fact of being currently tax exempt, whenever a Singaporean investor receives dividends from a Brazilian company, it shall be entitled to a credit over the income taxes paid in Brazil. What I mean is, whenever you earn profits in Brazil, a company, you pay roughly 34% of income taxes. After that, you have dividends to distribute. Dividends are tax exempt. But then, if you are a Singaporean investor, Singapore has committed under the DTT to grant a 34% credit over the same dividends, which were not taxed at source. So this actually reduces a lot when you model your investments from a Singapore to Brazil side. This is very interesting, and this is also something that only exists in other two DTTs executed by Brazil, which are Switzerland and United Arab Emirates. Those are the most recent DTTs. They follow this hybrid model from the UN and the OECD, and I think this is the major highlight here. And just to sum up, I'd like to comment on the capital gain part. Unfortunately, the DTT does not reduce the tax burden on the capital gains earned by one resident in the other country, but it clarifies and it makes certain the possibility of using credits over the income tax paid in one country to the other. So regardless of the fact that it is not reduced, it grants somehow a relief for double taxation. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you, Gabriel, very much for your presentation. I think it will be very good for Brazil and Singapore relations. The DTT will be a key factor for increasing interaction between those both countries in the future, near future. And now it's time for our panel, and which will be moderated by my partner for venture capital, Evie Marques, with the participation of Silvia Pearson. She's head of the Middle East office of Invest São Paulo. For those who don't know, Invest São Paulo is the investment promotion agency of the state of São Paulo. Yesterday we had São Paulo Negócios from the municipality of São Paulo, and Invest São Paulo is the state of São Paulo. And also with the participation of Josiah Choi from Enterprise Singapore. Enterprise Singapore is a statutory board formed by the Singaporean government to support, among other actions, to support Singapore business abroad. And this is why Enterprise Singapore has an office in São Paulo, and Josiah sits in Enterprise Singapore's São Paulo office. Also Julia from the Singapore embassy, who we've already known, and the other speakers as well, J.I., Diego, Gabriel, etc. Evie, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Annalise. Good morning, everyone. Good evening for you in Singapore. So yeah, in the next 20 minutes, we are gonna be further exploring opportunities of Singaporean and Brazilian companies doing business and both companies in both countries. And I'd like to start with Silvia. We have heard Julia explaining some of the initiatives of the Brazilian government to help Brazilian companies to develop business in Singapore. I'd like to hear from you what would be Brazil, the state of São Paulo initiatives in the same way for helping Brazilian companies to do business in Singapore. How can you guys help them in developing business there in Singapore?
Thank you, Evie. Yes, I think the federal government has amazing programs, and they are on their second or third or fourth edition, and they have been helping a lot of companies, including companies from the state of São Paulo. But we also would like, as a state, investment and export promotion organization, we also have a program to try to attract Singaporean companies, tech companies, to the state of São Paulo, and we also provide any assistance to companies from the state of São Paulo that want to export, invest, so internationalize their companies in Singapore. As a lot of people mentioned there, we see Singapore much like where I am now in Dubai is a gateway, is a hub. And in case of Singapore, is a hub to Asia. So we also want to help companies to export. We have a brand new program called Be Global that is directed for small companies from the state of São Paulo, where we design their whole strategy. Doesn't matter if they want to attract investments, if they want to open a company in Singapore, or if they want to export to Singapore. We design their whole strategy for Singapore. And we also provide, meetings, contacts, if they want to go to Singapore and have, physical meetings or virtual meetings. We also do that. We had the first edition that was with Dubai, with Shanghai, and with the US and Europe. And now we are opening one for Asia, especially for Singapore. And I also would like to mention, we do not have an office in Singapore, maybe yet, but Singapore is such an important market for us that we have 2 of our foreign offices that are responsible for Singapore. So my office here in Dubai and also our Shanghai office. We both work with Singapore, helping Singaporean companies come to São Paulo, or São Paulo companies to export, invest, whatever they would like to do. There's so many opportunities in Singapore.
Great, thank you, Sylvia. But in practical terms, if they want to help from Invest São Paulo, how should they contact you? There is this program, I understand, but there's any other ways of those companies contacting you, or what would be the best way of doing it?
Yes. So this company is actually on our website. I'm gonna add on the chat there. So the companies can enroll. This is for small companies. So the Big Global is for small companies. Other larger companies, they can also count with the expertise of our foreign offices. And the way we work is a little bit different from, generally with the TPO, the trade promotion organizations, when they have offices abroad, they provide, lists or strategies, but the way we work abroad, and that's how we work for Singapore too, is we assist a company for 1 full year, helping them on whatever they need. So this is the membership for the foreign offices, and in this case it would be Dubai, Shanghai together. So we have the Big Global for small companies, the international offices for the larger companies, and we also have all the work that our headquarters does in Brazil, especially helping Singaporean companies that want to establish themselves in São Paulo. I joined Invest São Paulo 3 years ago, and that was before my time, but Invest São Paulo was actually awarded the best trade promotion or best investment promotion organization in the world a few years ago by FTI. So what they do in Brazil for Singaporean companies is for foreign companies in general, it's amazing. So through the international offices, they can also access all the support that we have in São Paulo for international companies. But I will leave all my contact information on the chat for this meeting, and please feel free to contact me.
Thank you, Sylvia. So yeah, we have been from Julia's and Sylvia's talk, we have heard on many initiatives and ways of the Brazilian government can help Brazilian companies and Singaporean companies doing business in both countries. Now we do have Josiah from Enterprise Singapore, an agency from Singapore that helps Singaporean companies doing business abroad. And he's, as Annelise said, in Brazil, in São Paulo. So Josiah, if you can, as we talked a lot about technology today, if you can just give us more color on the technology scene in Singapore, the main industries that are developing startups, technology companies in Singapore, and how they may be interested in coming to Brazil, who they would be interested in partnering with, and how Enterprise Singapore can help them to start doing business in Brazil.
Sure. Thank you so much, Avi. Good question, and very broad as well. I'll take a stab at it. Well, Singapore is a very small country. If you know, we're 5.7 million population, maybe less now. A lot of the things that we have developed throughout the last few years has been out of necessity, in terms of with limited land, with limited resources, human capital has always been part of our core development as a nation. And by doing that, you can develop certain technologies that are relevant for the survival of Singapore to begin with, as well as we realize that a lot of these capabilities that we built throughout the years are very exportable. So if you talk about, and I believe that one of your colleagues shared a lot of the investment on the sectors on AI, and that's also a reflection on the sectors that the Singaporean government has put a lot of emphasis in, such as infrastructure, healthcare, energy, waste management, etc. These are areas that we believe that we are particularly strong in and that we can export. Of course, also financial services. As you already mentioned in your previous presentations, Singapore is a financial hub to Asia. We compete with Hong Kong to a certain extent. And a lot of the things that go around Asia is intra-Asia trade, which is very relevant for Brazil. So in terms of your question on technology, the type of startups that we have been seeing in coming out of Singapore to this side of the world, particularly in Brazil, have been quite interesting because it hasn't really been in a particular industry, but it has cut across transport and logistics. So anything that helps supply chain management systems, especially in your ports, which have been going through a lot of developments in the last few years with the privatizations, etc. A lot catered towards infrastructure in terms of how can we build in a smarter way, as well as fintech, of course. That one is quite obvious, and healthcare. Healthcare is a particularly very interesting sector for Singapore because Brazil has some of the top hospitals in the region, and they're constantly looking at how to better the services for their customers, particularly clinicians that have been driving this need for change or this need for technology adoption, which is very interesting for us. Throughout the last 5 years or so, we have created a lot of initiatives to support startups. So, for example, we have the Startup SG Founder, which provides, first-time entrepreneurs funding support up to 50,000 just to kickstart. And this does not just apply for Singaporean startups, but also for foreign startups that are looking to enter Singapore, not just for Singapore, but for the region, right? And then, of course, we have other schemes like Startup Equity, where we have Enterprise Singapore has a fund called Seeds Capital, where we can provide up to $3 million dollar for dollar funding together with private investors. And we have funded a lot of accelerators, which helps accelerate the growth of these very early stage startups. So how can they tap on this? Of course, reach out to us. Everything is all on our website. Feel free to write us. We have a team. We have been in Sao Paulo for the last 17 to 18 years now. So we're quite familiar with the market. So, yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Josiah. Gabriel, a question for you. What are the main advantages that Singaporean investors can expect from the implementation of the DTT?
Well, I guess a reduction of the overall tax burden, of course. This is the basic reason for DTT to exist. But also, this is something else to highlight here, is the fact that Singapore is not only a financial hub, but also a tax treaty hub. It has one of the most extensive tax treaty networks in the world, around 100 tax treaties. So meaning that, and mainly with all Asian countries. So it will also be a very interesting route for investing in Brazil with this new bridge. It is a game changer, actually, because until last year, if you wanted to have an investment through Singapore to Brazil or through any Asian country to Brazil, you have to check if a double tax treaty would apply or not. But now, if you do so through Singapore, then you are granted with clarity, certainty, predictability, not only for Singaporean investors, but also for any Asian country.
So you mean that you should set up a company
Yeah,
in Singapore and then start doing business from there?
Well, we know that lots of Asian companies already do so, but I think that the change here is that they will begin doing so with Brazil.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that's good news for the relationship between the region, right, and Brazil.
Like Austria is used for doing business.
Exactly, like Austria and
Europe
and the Netherlands.
And the Netherlands.
Perfect. Thank you. Do we have time for one more question?
Let me see. Maybe just one more, and then I wrap up.
Yeah. Okay, so Clarissa, so how can you guys work on the prevention of those risks that you mentioned today during the presentation? How can lawyers or technology colleagues can help on prevention of those risks?
Good question, Evie. And we do use very recently, IBM launched a platform, a technology that helps a lot us to analyze the algorithm risks. Because the algorithm, it will only be assessed, its risks will only be assessed if the AI itself presents high risk. So first, we as lawyers only, we do the AI impact assessment. So it has its own metrics, and we have also developed a technology for that, a platform that we use for that. But for the algorithm impact assessment, we have been currently using the IBM platform, which is very good, and we use it together with the products developers and the technical people from within the company. They do this assessment together with us. So the metrics for fairness, what is justice, and all of this we have to assess. So we do this together with people from the client, from the company, from within the company. And it's not, of course, it's not an easy job, because there are generic principles such as those. So, but it's very important for companies to do these assessments, because we have the accountability principle in Brazil, and the LGPD, the data protection law. So we have to do that. The companies must do an assessment and further present that assessment in case something occurs. Okay. Thank you.
Wow, that's what I have to say after 2 days discussing about some different topics that tie Brazil and Singapore. Yeah, I was so much impressed with that so much room of cooperation between both countries. And from yesterday I learned, yes, there's so many different in mining and aviation. There's so many sectors where you cooperate: oil and gas and logistics. And now, and yesterday, yes, as Ambassador Battlemans already said, Brazil and Singapore are two digital nations. And that's what I really learned here today, and how there is a huge potential of increasing. It is already increasing a lot. When I learned from Julia that last year there were 3 participants at the Week of Technology in Singapore, and this year there'll be 15, and we already had 70 applicants last year. It's really booming and increasing. And if I may do a link between yesterday and today, especially yesterday we had São Paulo Negócios, as I already mentioned, and we were talking about all the urban challenges that we have in São Paulo. And well, São Paulo and Singapore, in terms of size, they might be, in the municipality, they might be similar. So I understand we quite have the same challenges, the urban challenges. And as Singapore is quite much developed in dealing with those challenges, as Josiah mentioned, waste management, building hospital, health techs in hospitals, and how to build in sustainable ways. I really, clean energy, logistics, urban mobility. So I think there's a huge spot here of cooperation in urban tech and bringing technology to the municipality in São Paulo, and to the state of São Paulo as well, as Silva also mentioned, the Be Global initiative, which I think could be quite useful in that area. Well, of course, to wrap up today, I think when we think about technology, we automatically think about all the challenges. And I think you did a great presentation, Clarissa, with all those challenges involving AI governance and AI and how relevant data governance and how necessary it is, digital governance. Also, how to keep our IP rights secure, because when we speak about technology, you cannot go without speaking on IP protection. And yeah, while we see technology as a preferred area for business cooperation and direct investments between Brazil and Singapore, we cannot go without mentioning the new DTT and how essential it will be for the increasing of these direct investments in the future, as you mentioned, usually when a DTT is concluded, there is a 30% increase of investment flows between both countries. And I see here in Singapore, we have a much higher potential for that. When you see Singapore as a hub for Asia, that could be used as a hub for Asia for a Brazilian company. So yes, I think we have a very promising future in the Singapore Brazil cooperation, a matchmaking heaven. So thank you very much for participating. Would you like to add anything?
No, I'm very impressed, you know, congratulations to you all, you know. It's fantastic how this cooperation among our law firms and other government agencies and private agencies are important. You know, dialogue is the basis of everything. So I'm very impressed. I'm pleased, I'm happy with the results. And I congratulate you all for this terrific event.
Thank you all. Bye.
Thank you.